Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues. With this video, I want to talk about Ash vs. Evil Dead Season 2. Now, as you can tell by the title, I kind of feel like the finale for Ash vs. Evil Dead Season 2 maybe didn't make a whole lot of sense. And I'll be getting to that in a timely fashion. Before I get to that, I don't want to seem like I'm slamming the show. This is one of my favorite shows, like, ever in history. I love Bruce Campbell. I'm such a fan of the man. I've read his autobiographical novel, If Chins Could Kill, Confessions of a B-Movie Actor, at least 3 times. And I'm so impressed by the actor. Notice I'm saying Bruce Campbell, the person, the actor, not Ash Williams, the character, even though I do love Ash. You know, I love the character. He is insane. He's hilarious. He's somewhat of a badass, but he's maybe not the best role model in the world. But I love the movies. I love this show. The show constantly is topping itself every single episode. I don't know how they managed to do it. They go over the top, and they top what they did in the last episode. Every single episode, from very much episode 2 of season 2 with the morgue situation. And so I want to start this video sort of praising and calling back on the things I've loved about season 2 of Ash vs. Evil Dead before I get into the finale and why I'm really struggling to make sense of how it all ended. The final scene is what really put it over the edge as far as WTF-ery goes. So my favorite things about the show, I love the cast, of course. Bruce Campbell is the man. I love listening to him talk. I love, in reading his book, learning about all of the pains they went through in creating that initial movie and then trying to distribute it and all that kind of stuff, and his callbacks to his past and his life and what influences they took. The Three Stooges, which you can see over here behind me, in the slapstick that they would bring forth in these films, and you see very much present, ever present, in Ash vs. Evil Dead Season 2 with the return of Ted Raimi. All kinds of awesome. They got him back as both a, flesh and blood himself kind of character, and Ash's friend, I think the name was Chet, as well as, spoiler warning, Henrietta, and we'll get there, But my favorite 2, cast members of the show is, of course, Bruce Campbell's Ash, Bruce Campbell, and Dana De Lorenzo's Kelly. I mean, I'm so smitten with her. I have such a crush on her to begin with. But her character, Kelly, is just all kinds of badass. The way she wants to fuck people's faces with bullets just had me dying, and seeing that she's on this sort of course, steering somewhat away from Ash, not quite away from him, but on her own path. It's just sort of an inspiring kind of framework that, and it's kind of sad how it plays out between, Kelly and Ruby by the end, by that finale. But I think it will be something to propel her to continue on that sort of mission statement of, you're just as strong, if not stronger than Ash. I mean, she could become sort of the female equivalent of that badassery in the show. You never know. And of course, that is not to say, while those are my 2 favorite characters, that is not to, dismantle any of the respect I have for Pablo and Ruby. These are 2 characters who you couldn't have the story the way it is without them, I don't think. And Pablo became all kinds of badass. I mean, I will admit, throughout season 1, I liked his character, but I only really kind of liked his character where I loved, Ash. I loved Kelly. This season put it over the top for me with Pablo. I loved Pablo by the end, and the sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice he makes in trying to defeat the baddie of the season, Baal. It was just insane. It was all kinds of awesome and insane. And talking about favorite moments, though, if you go back to episode 1, just about when they're going to go and confront Ruby for the first time in a while. They haven't seen her in a while since the end of season 1. And the Deadites have come a-calling, and, they've tracked her down to, I think it's like an abandoned asylum or something like that. And there's this moment where Ash goes to the back of the car, and he takes off the robotic hand that Pablo made. He gets on the chainsaw, he grabs the boomstick, and then he grabs a little bottle of cologne, and he looks right at the camera after putting it on, and he smiles and winks, and that made me laugh out loud. From that moment on, it's not that there was any doubt, but I knew I was going to be in for a hell of a fun ride. And that's pretty much what this season was. But then, of course, episode 2, the morgue episode, where Ash goes up against this evil sentient colon. The whole show was off the rails from that moment on. Little Prince Albert going boink, boink, boink onto his face and everything. Had me dying. I was laughing so much. I was a mixture of laughing and being like, ooh, God, I don't know if I want to see this, It was just pitch perfect hilarity and absurdity. Which then, as I say, every single episode from then on, it carried on with that. It topped itself constantly. Things like, the introduction of Baal and how this guy could really manipulate minds. He gets into the mind of Ash and brings him to that asylum. You have Ashy Slashy, the little puppet. Kelly versus Ashy Slashy was all kinds of badass, I gotta say. And this after the townspeople had really, in sort of, I guess you could say, welcoming Ash back. He was a pariah. He was a crazy sociopathic murderer. He killed his friends who he took out to this lone cabin in the middle of the woods, and he had to be on the run. We meet his father. Lee Majors plays Ash Williams' father, and talk about pitch perfect. I mean, I'm a fan of classic TV series and such like that, especially genre shows, $6 Million Man, that kind of stuff. And to see Lee Majors, who is just pitch perfect, inspired casting, you could tell he was having a ball with this material, and that makes me appreciate it that much more. He gets it. He watched the first season, if you listen to interviews, and I thought it was absolutely funny. Even though he doesn't really get into the whole gory aspect, that was okay because it was all caked in hilarity and absurdity. And for him to appreciate that and then bring it into a role, which, Ash is very much a chip off the old block, all that kind of stuff was absolutely awesome. Just love that. But calling back to Kelly versus Ashy Slashy, that's one of my favorite moments. The puppet talking about your hands all up in my puppet pooper and all this stuff. And that was one of my favorite moments in the season, hands down. This puppet talking back and forth with Ash proper, then talking back and forth with Kelly having to kick its ever-loving ass, everything like that. Ash's lover of old, and we find out she's married to, the town sheriff, and what happens with them is really all kinds of tragic, but at least, I think her name was Linda. Ash can get with her again by the end and everything like that. They still had feelings and so forth. And so it all really ramps up to this finale where one of my favorite things in sci-fi, in entertainment properties, whatever it is, my all-time favorite sort of genre has always been time travel. The Time Machine by H.G. Wells is my all-time favorite novel. To introduce time travel all over again, to have Ash call back to Army of Darkness with his, I went to the Middle Ages line of dialogue. Before this happens, we find out in the finale, of course, this was all Baal's doing, very much messing with the mind of Ash in his mourning Pablo after Pablo's, self-sacrificed, killed himself to try to, destroy Baal and everything. We find out Baal used this as a sort of impetus to have Ash, Kelly, and Ruby go back in time and all this kind of stuff. The time travel vortex, loved it. I was like goosebumps when this was happening in the second to last episode. And so they end up back in 1982. Now, keep in mind, the entire town, that Ash hails from, when he comes back at the early portion of the season, they all hate him. He is a pariah. He is a living embodiment of a murderer, sociopath. He should be behind bars. He maybe should get the death penalty. I leave that to you, the viewer, to argue. But people were calling for his head. And eventually he wins them over by showing them the evil dead really exist. The Deadites exist, through the form of another aspect of Season 2 I absolutely loved and gave me goosebumps and chills, having Ellen Sandweiss come back as Ash's sister. My God, that talking about topping itself over and over and over again, having her back, I just had goosebumps. I was on the edge of my seat. My jaw was agape. I was like, this is so awesome, And so they go back to 1982 to the cabin, and for all intents and purposes, the dialogue purports they are back before young Ash, his sister, and their friends ever go to the cabin in the original timeline, in the original films. And so what we're going to be seeing is time is going to be changing a lot. And that's exactly what happens. The primary sort of first stage of that is Ash versus Henrietta. Again, Ted Raimi reprising that role expertly, I thought. And their fisticuffs match was like, so uber exciting. But here's the thing. Ash kills Henrietta in the finale episode. He beheads this creature, thus undoing, one would assume, the events that happen in Evil Dead 2, where we first saw Henrietta. Well, if he destroys her here and now, young Ash cannot certainly, summon that Deadite demon and face it in Evil Dead 2 the way it originally happened. And suddenly I start to get a little apprehensive. I'm like, wow, they can really do anything. They can really change time. But here's the problem with that, as I say, doesn't quite make sense with the final scene of the finale. Because we're seeing time is changing down to killing Henrietta. There's a scene when Ash and Kelly are trying to get away. They think they're all said and done with the events and everything. They can leave, soundly, safe and soundly. Ash's hand comes back. And I love his dialogue, too. Brand spanking new hand or brand new spanking hand, He made me laugh out loud. But that's the whole idea. He's changed time. He never apparently went back to that cabin in his youth, right? Because it's all being changed by them being there. When we find out that Pablo has not really come back to life, it's actually been Ball all along. They go back to the cabin. Ash challenges Ball to a fight. They duke it out. 80s or Dark Ruby ends up, holding that blood pact true with the Necronomicon, so that if Ball loses, that's it. He's screwed. Even if he doesn't lose, I guess she turns the tables on him because she figures out, pieces together, that he'll eventually, consider her having betrayed him, and they'll turn on each other and all this stuff. And so she makes sure that Ball gets wiped out in the end for her own devices. But in doing so, they level the cabin. There's no cabin any longer in 1982. There's no place for Ash and his friends and his sister to go to in that first movie by the end of the episode. And the finale episode ends with, of course, Ash has re-lost his hand. Ball, in the form of Ted Raimi's Chet, cuts it off all over again. You knew it wasn't going to last for all the 5 minutes. And his hand is sentient and goes running away. I don't know if that was still the evil lingering from when, in the second to last episode, he stepped on that spike and the dark evil went up into his leg and he sucked out the little creature. Fuck you, Ash, which had me dying, as usual. But so they come back to the present, purportedly, in that final scene, and there's this big parade, there's this big event. They are championing Ash Williams as the town savior, as a hero, which for all intents and purposes he is owed. I agree with that. I think he is very much a hero and everything like that. The problem is, if they manage to undo all of the events of the first two Evil Dead movies, and even Army of Darkness, I would have to assume, in going back to 1982, in wiping out the cabin, in destroying Henrietta before young Ash could ever do it in Evil Dead 2, Ash gets his hand back. I mean, it's arguable, was that the evil that infected him and brought back that hand? Was it the changing of time itself, where young Ash never had to cut his hand off in the first place? That point is arguable. But in coming back to present day, he's ushered as a hero. But why is he ushered as a hero? Because shouldn't all of those events that saw him being so proclaimed as a pariah, as a murderer, as a psychotic who should be jailed, shouldn't all of that have been undone by the events of these last two episodes of the season? And so I'm sitting here wondering, how does this make any sense? How is the town remembering seeing the Deadites and everything like that? Unless it's just the events of this season they're remembering, because when Ash is, of course, confronting them, he's calling them assholes because of the way they treated him when he first came back and everything like that. They disdained him. They wanted his head. for the deaths of his friends and everything like that. Does the town even remember any of that? Did any of that actually happen? It must have happened, because they're in sort of the Return of the Jedi ghostly apparition forms are Lee Majors as Daddy, are Ellen Sandweiss as the Sis, and Ted Raimi as Chet, all, signaling their appreciation to Ash as well. Is that a product of his mind? Did that, I'm having trouble figuring all of this out. Is the town strictly remembering the Evil Dead that, impacted it in the here and now, and not all of that past that Ash brings up, where he allegedly brought his friends out to a cabin that no longer exists anymore, and time has seemingly been rewritten, and yet everyone in the town, to put it in a nutshell, still treats it like it all happened. How could it all have happened if Ash went back in time, they wiped out the cabin so there would be no cabin, he had gotten his hand back for a time, lost it all over again, but, in sort of destroying seemingly the Necronomicon, wiping out Baal, and with Ruby's help, destroying that cabin and everything like that. How could those events in the original movies still have happened to be in the memory centers of all of the people of the town who have now changed their tune and are, treating him like such a hero and everything like that? It doesn't quite make sense, unless maybe this whole sequence where he's being lauded now at the end of the episode is in his mind. Is it like another mind trick from Ruby? We see Ruby in the crowd at the end, so is this some influence on her part? I don't know. She still looks like 80s Ruby, so if they're in the present day, which is to be assumed, how does she still look like 80s Ruby, dark Ruby? I don't know. And then toward the very end, of course, we call back to where that cabin ought to be. We see the VW bug, and where, Professor Nobi, which it was cool seeing Nobi as well in this season, apparently had been killed, murdered inside it. And some girl, we hear a girl's voice as she finds the Necronomicon. So we know the book still exists. But is that present day girl? Is that 1982 girl? Are the events still happening in some way in the 80s that Ash either was or wasn't involved in? I guess we're going to have to wait for season 3 to figure that all out. And it just strikes me as strange because, as I say, it doesn't quite add up. It doesn't quite make sense the way I wish it would, as linearly as I wish it would, in that they went back and changed time. They changed the events, and yet it still seems to have happened, or did it? I don't know. All of those events still seem to be in the minds of the townspeople who are now hailing Ash as a hero, but could it be that they are only hailing him for the concurrent season 2 infestation of Deadites and everything like that, and now none of them, remember that situation of old where he took his friends to the cabin and murdered them because of the Evil Dead that they didn't believe all those years? And if that didn't happen, how is his sister still dead? How are his friends still dead? All that stuff. I don't know. Maybe I'm making mountains out of molehills here. But in thinking about it, I loved the finale. I felt up until the end like it was all kinds of awesome. It gave me goosebumps seeing Ash hailed as a hero, much deservedly so. Kelly and Pablo as well. But then as I started to think about it, I was like, how are they hailing him as a hero if none of that ever happened? How could that have ever happened if they destroyed the cabin and all this stuff in the past? Which seemed to be hallmarked by the fact that he destroyed Henrietta. He had gotten his hand back, temporarily though it may have been. Just kind of doesn't make sense to me. And so I put it out there. I leave it to you guys, my fellow Ash vs. Evil Dead lovers, viewers, fans. Are you having the same kind of problem with it as I am? Thinking this doesn't quite add up, it doesn't quite make sense? Or do you think it makes perfect sense? And if so, especially if you do believe it makes perfect sense, please take the time to describe to me in the comments how you think it makes sense. If you think it is, in fact, the townspeople are hailing Ash the hero because of all of the Deadite infestation in Season 2 by itself, what you think happened with those original events. Were they completely erased from history? Did they still somehow happen? Was the cabin able to come back? All this kind of stuff. I mean, I think we've seen the cabin destroyed before, and then it's back at some point, anyway, so that might have been what happened, but I mean, if young Ash never went there, never had the opportunity to go there with his friends, surely he couldn't have killed them, and yet they're still gone, and help me make sense of this, if you can. Otherwise, tell me, as I already figured, we'll have to wait till Season 3 to see if they ever touch upon it again, and I can't wait. I will be waiting with bated breath for that. So, yeah, enough of my yapping. I hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.